You're not afraid of failure. If you were, you would have tried already. Failure is clear. It's defined. You act, you miss, you adjust. That's not what you've been avoiding. You've been avoiding something else. Something far more uncomfortable. Your potential. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Marcus Aurelius. Because potential is not safe. It doesn't come with guarantees. It doesn't come with certainty. It comes with pressure, expectation, responsibility. And most people don't avoid action because they doubt themselves. They avoid it because they sense what will be required if they actually succeed. Discipline, consistency, standards, a version of themselves that no longer negotiates, no longer hides, no longer delays. And that version feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable. So you stay where you are, not because it's better, because it's known. You understand your current limits, your current patterns, your current excuses. They're predictable. They don't demand much from you. They allow you to stay in control. But potential removes that comfort. Because once you step into it, you don't get to go back to who you were. You don't get to pretend you don't know what you're capable of. You don't get to settle without feeling it. That's the real fear. Not failure. Exposure. Being exposed to your own capacity. Seeing what you could become. And realizing how far you've been holding yourself back. That's heavy. Because now the responsibility is undeniable. You can't say, I don't know. You can't say, I'm not capable. You can't hide behind uncertainty. You see it. Clearly. And once you see it, you have to choose. Step into it. Or keep avoiding it. And avoidance has a cost. Not immediate. But constant. You feel it in moments of silence, when you know you're capable of more, but you're not doing it. You feel it when you see others moving forward, not because they're better, because they're acting, and you're not. That gap creates tension, internal pressure, not because you're failing, because you're not trying. That's what drains you, not effort, avoidance. Because avoiding your potential requires energy. You have to distract yourself, justify your delay, lower your standards, convince yourself that where you are is enough, even when you know it's not. That's exhausting, and it builds over time, into frustration. Into regret, into that constant feeling that something is off, that you're not where you should be, that you're capable of more. And you are. But potential doesn't activate itself. It doesn't appear suddenly. It requires action. Consistent, uncomfortable, unavoidable action. And that's where most people stop. Not because they can't. Because they won't commit to what it demands. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marcus Aurelius. You already have the capacity. That's not the issue. The issue is your willingness to use it. Without waiting. Without overthinking. Without needing to feel ready. Because you won't feel ready. Not for something that requires you to grow. Not for something that forces you to become different. That's the point. Growth is uncomfortable. Not because it's difficult, because it requires you to let go of the version of you that feels safe. And that's what you've been protecting. Not your future, your current identity, the version of you that waits, that hesitates, that stays within familiar limits. That version feels secure, but it's costing you everything, because while you protect it, you delay everything you could become. So the question becomes simple. Are you going to keep protecting who you are? Or are you going to step into who you could be? Because you can't do both. How you're avoiding your potential. You don't wake up and decide to avoid your potential. It's more subtle than that. More controlled. More intelligent. That's why it's dangerous. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Seneca. You've learned how to stay busy, without moving forward. How to feel productive, without actually progressing. How to convince yourself you're working on it, while avoiding the one thing that would actually change your life. Action. Real action. The kind that exposes you. The kind that forces growth. The kind that removes your ability to hide. Instead, you choose safer forms of engagement. You think. You plan. You organize. You prepare. All of it feels useful. All of it feels necessary. But most of it is avoidance. Because none of it requires you to risk anything. You stay in control. Inside your head, where everything is adjustable, reversible, safe. That's the pattern. You replace execution with preparation, movement with analysis, reality with possibility. And the more you do this, the more convincing it becomes. You start to believe you're making progress, because you're doing something. But that something isn't moving you forward. It's keeping you in place. Comfortably, quietly, consistently. While we are postponing, life speeds by. Seneca. You tell yourself you need more clarity, more information, more time. But clarity doesn't come from thinking. It comes from acting. Information doesn't create progress. Execution does. And time doesn't solve delay. It amplifies it. So what you call preparation is often just delay with structure. It feels productive, but it produces nothing. That's the first way you avoid your potential. You stay in motion, without direction. The second way is more subtle. You lower your standards. Not consciously, gradually. You start with something clear. A goal, a direction, a standard for how you want to operate. But then resistance shows up. Discomfort, effort, uncertainty. And instead of pushing through it, you adjust the standard. You make it easier, more flexible, more forgiving. I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do less today. I'll come back to it later. And just like that, your potential gets pushed further away. Not because you failed, because you reduced the requirement. You made it easier to stay the same. That's the second pattern. You don't rise to your potential. You bring your potential down to your comfort. And over time, that becomes your normal. A version of you that could do more, but chooses not to. Repeatedly. The third way is the most deceptive. You distract yourself. Not with obvious things. With acceptable ones. content, information, learning. You consume more than you apply. You watch, you listen, you absorb, and it feels like growth. But it's not. It's input without output. And without output, nothing changes. You know more, but you don't do more. So your life stays the same. That's the trap. You feel like you're improving, but your behavior hasn't changed. And behavior is the only thing that matters. Don't explain your philosophy. Embody it. Epictetus. You don't need more information. You need more execution. Because everything you've been avoiding is not hidden. It's obvious. It's the work you keep delaying, the actions you keep postponing, the decisions you keep thinking about, instead of making. That's where your potential is. Not in what you know, in what you do, consistently, without negotiation. But negotiation has been your pattern. You negotiate with discomfort. You negotiate with effort. You negotiate with your own standards. And every time you negotiate, you lose. Because potential doesn't respond to negotiation. It responds to commitment. Direct. Uncompromised. Repeated. That's what you've been avoiding. Not the work itself. The level of consistency it requires. Because consistency removes your ability to hide. You can't pretend. You can't delay. You can't disappear. You show up. Every day. At the same standard. That's uncomfortable. Because it demands discipline. Not occasionally. Constantly. So you avoid it. Through thinking. Through planning. Through distraction. Through lowered standards. All of it serving the same purpose. Keep you from stepping fully into what you're capable of. But now you see it. Clearly. And once you see it, you can't pretend it's not happening. You'll notice when you start planning instead of acting. You'll catch yourself lowering the standard. You'll recognize when you're consuming instead of executing. And that awareness creates a choice. Every time. Continue the pattern. Or break it. And breaking it is simple. Not easy. Simple. You act on the thing you've been avoiding. Immediately. Without preparing more. Without thinking more. Without adjusting the standard. You just do it. That's how you stop avoiding your potential. Not by understanding it. By stepping into it. Face the fear directly. You've been calling it overthinking. You've been calling it hesitation. You've been calling it not ready. But that's not what it is. It's fear. Not of failure. Of exposure. Nothing happens to anyone that he is not fitted by nature to bear. Marcus Aurelius. Because failure is simple. You act. It doesn't work. You adjust. There's clarity in that. There's movement in that. There's progress in that. But potential is different. Potential asks more from you. It demands consistency. It demands discipline. It demands that you operate at a level you haven't sustained before. And that's what creates fear. Not the outcome. The requirement. You're not afraid of trying. You're afraid of what happens if you succeed. Because success removes your ability to go back. It removes the version of you that waits. That hesitates. That stays comfortable. Once you prove to yourself that you can operate at a higher level, you don't get to pretend you can't anymore. And that creates pressure, because now the standard changes. Permanently. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Epictetus. You've already seen glimpses of your potential. Moments where you were focused, disciplined, clear. And in those moments, everything moved. You executed. You followed through. You didn't hesitate. And you felt it. That version of you. Capable. Sharp. In control. But you didn't stay there. You dropped back. Not because you couldn't maintain it. Because it required something you weren't willing to sustain. Consistency. That's the fear. Not doing it once. Doing it every day. Because once you commit to that, there are no breaks. No excuses. No negotiating with yourself. You show up, whether you feel like it or not. That's what you've been avoiding. The removal of choice. The removal of flexibility. The removal of the option to fall back. Because right now, you still have that option. You can delay. You can skip. You can tell yourself tomorrow. And nothing forces you to correct it. But once you step into your potential, that changes. You don't tolerate that behavior anymore. From yourself. And that's uncomfortable. Because it removes your safety net. The ability to fall short without consequence. The ability to stay average without feeling it. So you stay where you are. Not because it's satisfying. Because it's manageable. Predictable. Less demanding. But it comes with a cost. A constant awareness that you're not doing what you're capable of. That you're holding back. That you're playing smaller than you should. And that awareness doesn't go away. It builds. Quietly. Until it turns into frustration. Into pressure. Into that feeling that something is off. That you're not aligned with who you could be. That's the cost of avoiding your potential. Not failure. Regret. And regret is heavier. Because it doesn't come from what you did. It comes from what you didn't do. From what you avoided. From what you knew, but didn't act on. Do not act as if you had 10,000 years to live. Marcus Aurelius. Time removes the illusion. Eventually, you either step into your potential, or you feel the weight of not doing it. There's no neutral, no middle ground. So the fear you're experiencing right now is not something to eliminate. It's something to move through. Because fear is not a stop signal. It's an indicator. It shows you where growth is required. Where you're about to step beyond your current limits. Where your identity is about to change. That's why it feels intense. Because it's unfamiliar. And unfamiliar feels dangerous. Even when it's not. So you don't wait for fear to disappear. You act while it's there. That's the shift. You stop trying to become fearless. You become someone who moves despite fear. Because fear doesn't control your actions. You do. That's the difference. And every time you act in that state, you weaken it. You prove to yourself that it doesn't have authority. That it doesn't define what you do. And over time, it loses its hold. Not because it disappears. Because it becomes irrelevant. You feel it. And you move anyway. That's what separates you. Not the absence of fear. the absence of obedience to it. Step into your potential. You don't step into your potential by thinking about it. You step into it by acting like it's already required. Not later. Now. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. Marcus Aurelius. That's the shift. You stop treating your potential like a future version of yourself. Something distant. Something you'll grow into over time. You bring it into the present. Through behavior. Because your potential is not something you unlock. It's something you express. Through what you do. Every day. So the question becomes simple. What would the version of you operating at full capacity do today? Not in theory. In action. How would they move? How would they respond to resistance? How would they handle discomfort? They wouldn't hesitate. They wouldn't negotiate. They wouldn't wait to feel ready. They would act. Directly. Immediately. Consistently. That's what you do. You don't wait to become that person. You behave like them now. And behavior shapes identity. Not the other way around. You've been waiting for identity to change first. To feel more confident. More disciplined. More in control. But those are results of action. Not prerequisites for it. So you reverse the order. You act first. Then identity follows. First say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. Epictetus. This is where most people break. Because acting at that level feels unnatural. It feels forced. It feels like you're pretending. But that's exactly what growth feels like. You're stepping outside your current pattern. Of course it won't feel normal. Of course it will feel uncomfortable. But that discomfort is not a sign to stop. It's confirmation that you're doing something different. And different is what creates change. So you lean into it. You don't adjust down. You don't make it easier. You meet the standard. Fully. Because your potential doesn't respond to partial effort. It responds to consistency. And consistency requires something simple. Non-negotiable action. You remove the option to not act. Completely. The task is clear. You do it. No internal discussion. No delay. No conditions. That's how you build it. Moment by moment. Decision by decision. You don't think about the entire future. You focus on what's in front of you. And you execute. Clean. Direct. Without hesitation. That's how potential becomes real. Not through planning. Through repetition. You repeat high-level behavior until it becomes automatic. Until it no longer feels forced. Until it becomes your default. And once that happens, everything shifts. Because now, you don't need to push yourself. You don't need to convince yourself. You don't need to rely on motivation. You operate at that level naturally. That's the goal. Not temporary intensity. Permanent standard. Do not explain your philosophy. Embody it. Epictetus. You don't talk about discipline. You show it. Through your actions. Every day. You don't talk about focus. You demonstrate it. Through what you complete. You don't talk about potential. You live it. Through consistent execution. That's what separates you from everyone who stays in theory. Who understands everything, but does nothing. You act relentlessly, without needing it to feel right, because you've removed that requirement. And once you remove that requirement, you become dangerous, in the best way, focused, consistent, unstoppable, because now your actions are not influenced by your feelings. They're driven by your standards. And standards don't change. They don't depend on your mood. They don't adjust based on discomfort. They remain. And you meet them. Every time. That's how you step into your potential. Not once. Not occasionally. Daily. Until it becomes who you are. Become what you fear. You've been running from it. Not failure. Not difficulty. Yourself. The version of you that doesn't hesitate. That doesn't negotiate. That doesn't wait for permission. Because once you become that person, everything changes. Permanently. He who fears death will never do anything worthy of a man who is alive. Seneca. Fear has been your boundary. Not because it's real. Because you've treated it like a limit. A signal to stop. To step back. To stay where it's familiar. But fear was never meant to hold you in place. It was meant to show you where you need to grow. And everything you've been avoiding is on the other side of it. Discipline. Execution. Consistency. The version of you that actually follows through. That version is not far away. It's not something you become over time. It's something you step into. Through action. Repeated. Without exception. You don't eliminate fear first. You move with it. You act while it's there. You execute despite it. That's the shift. Because the moment you stop obeying fear, it loses its authority. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because fear survives on avoidance, on hesitation, on delay. Remove those, and it weakens, every time, until it becomes background, still present, but irrelevant. Do not be afraid of difficulties. The harder the struggle, the more glorious the triumph. Seneca. You've been waiting to feel different, to feel ready, to feel confident. But none of that comes first. It comes after. After you act. After you show up. After you prove to yourself that you can operate at a higher level. That's when confidence builds. Not before. So you stop waiting for it. Completely. You act without it. You move without it. You execute without needing it. And in doing that, you become it. That's how identity shifts. Not through intention. Through repetition. You repeat the behavior of the person you're afraid to become. Until it becomes normal. Until it becomes expected. Until it becomes you. That's when the fear disappears. Not because it was removed. Because it was replaced. With familiarity. With consistency. With proof. You've done it enough times that it no longer feels threatening. It feels like baseline. That's the goal. Not occasional growth. Permanent change. And permanent change requires something simple. No way back. You remove the option to return to who you were. You don't allow hesitation. You don't allow excuses. You don't allow delay. Not sometimes. Ever. Because the moment you allow it once, You reopen the pattern. You give it space, and it will take it. So you don't. You cut it off. At the moment it appears. You act. Immediately. Every time. That's what keeps you at that level. Not motivation. Structure. Standards.
Non-negotiable execution.
You don't think about whether you should act. You act. You don't question whether it's the right time. You move. You don't wait for alignment. You create it. Through behavior. That's what it means to become what you fear. You don't admire it. You don't think about it. You live it. Daily. Until there's no difference between who you are and who you were afraid to become. That's the final shift.
No gap. No hesitation.
No identity conflict. Just execution. Consistent. Direct. Unavoidable. That's who you are now. If you made it this far, then you already know. So don't stop here. Subscribe to the Unbroken Protocol and continue to the next video. Why you don't prioritize yourself. Because once you step into your potential, you'll realize something else has been holding you back. Not fear. Not your mind. The way you've been placing everything else above yourself. See you in the next video.